Welcome, everyone, to the 7th edition of MiCannaPulse. How you doing, my friend Anton?
I'm doing very well, Harry. How are you doing?
Not too shabby for this unseasonably chilly Tuesday afternoon. It is March 17th at 2 o'clock almost. And man, is it freezing out there.
Never get used to it. It's we're wishing for spring and hoping for summer, and in the meantime, episode 7. Here we are. I think we got a really cool guest today. Everybody loves this particular person's perspective on how the emerging Michigan cannabis industry is going forward, and what the state of it is. So I think we got another good show. How about you, my friend?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're excited to have Director Hanna to kind of discuss some very important topics that are happening in this industry. You know, um, we all have been, many of us have been reading and hearing about a lot of different things that are tremendously impacting this industry. One, major indicator, um, you know, that we've seen reports lately, obviously, is the decline in sales, not just 2025 compared to 2024, but also January and February of 2026 compared to 2025. So, not sure if that's just the industry itself. I'm not sure how much of that has to do with people stocking up in December. I'm not sure how much of that has to do with potential price increases with the new taxes, right? Because a lot of people said, "Hey, people are probably going to go back to the black market," right? And
A lot of
look what's
volatility. With a lot of volatility.
yeah, and look what's happening in the black market. You're seeing people. Um, the new, report just came out yesterday of somebody that just got popped with 1,000 pounds of flour, not to mention all the other product, vape pens and what have you. And that's you know that is definitely um, there's probably a lot of that going on, right? And a lot of people just aren't getting caught, and a lot of people are probably not doing it on that scale. So when you add all that up, are people going to the black market? Well, there's certainly a lot of options in the black market, so depending on who you choose to deal with. And so you know the sales is definitely somewhat concerning for a lot of people that I talk to, and not so concerning, fortunately, for um, a good amount of people that I talk to. So, um, I feel like the guys that have been around for a long time are going to probably continue to be around for a long time, and that if you're new in this industry and you're trying to break in right now, it's going to be a tough go for a lot of these guys. But um, you know we'll see what happens in March and in April, right? April, of course, will be probably the biggest indicator of how this year might do compared to years past. So, and that's right around the corner, a little over a month away. Got any
Yeah.
plans for 420?
Not really, surprisingly, right? Relax. I think
Yeah,
420. It's all, but you know what? I think in Michigan, 420 is always it's always been a successful day, obviously, around the country. But
yeah,
I think you're still going to see the customers out there looking for deals, and I still think that licensees, despite the tax or not, are going to be offering those deals just because the potential for revenue on that particular day is really greater than probably any other day in the year. So
yeah,
I think that we're going to see probably hopefully a successful 420. You discussed the black market bust that was yesterday. The big note was DEA was involved on that one. So the feds are in the background, and I think they've been pretty hands off for the most part. But when you have 1,000 pounds and guns and whatever else, I don't think they're going to turn a blind eye to that. So I think we'll see more enforcement on those types of things. But with that being said, we are fortunate to have a market here, a legal market that consumers can turn to with product that's tested. And yeah, so I think we're gonna be successful this year again, despite the lower sales. But
Yeah, I
today's
mean, there's
guest.
there's there's sales right now. Actually, I saw people posting St. Patty's Day sales. So it seems like you know, uh, obviously there's still a major oversupply in this industry, and in order to get rid of that oversupply, there has to be major sales by everyone, right? Like that's the only way that this stuff is going to move. Um, and the question is how much more can people consume, right? Like, you know,
We're lucky we have the perfect guy to answer those questions. He's trying to pop on now. A great show planned for you today. Hope everybody enjoys the perspective and the questions and the conversation. So I think, Harry, with that being said, we could move into our guest, Executive Director of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency in Michigan, Brian Hanna. The first partner we would like to highlight today is our wonderful friends and partners over at Community Choice Credit Union, who have proudly served Michigan since 1935. Their mission is to help neighbors achieve financial success through affordable, accessible solutions, whether you're opening your first account or planning for retirement. Community Choice is committed to serving the Michigan cannabis industry in many different aspects, including providing banking solutions and loans for commercial or personal use. For the last 6 years, Donna Bashi, Vice President of Business Development, who is a legend in the Michigan cannabis banking circles, has led their cannabis business program. They serve over 600 cannabis companies in the state of Michigan and have 25 locations to serve their growing customer base. Thank you, Community Choice Credit Union. Our next sponsor is where our very own Harry Barish practices cannabis brokerage, C3 Commercial Real Estate. In a fast-paced and evolving cannabis real estate market, staying ahead requires more than just tracking market trends and utilizing data analytics. It requires a unique combination of agility, creativity, and foresight. At C3 Commercial Real Estate, they possess these qualities and more, offering a comprehensive range of real estate services to help you enhance the value of your investment and business portfolio. With their in-depth understanding of financial and geographic markets, and their ability to decipher the socioeconomic and political factors that shape them, they ensure that you are well prepared to overcome industry challenges and seize new opportunities. Thank you, C3 Commercial Real Estate. So, with us today, Executive Director of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, Brian Hanna. Director Hanna, we are thrilled to have you here today. Director Hanna was appointed by the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and you've been executive director for 2.5 years now. Is it almost 3 at this point? It's been a minute, right? And prior to your position with the CRA, I know we've had several conversations. You are also a Army veteran, and you have a steep background within the law enforcement intelligence community, which has, I know, lended a great deal of perspective to the agency and how it's evolved in today's world. So, Director Hanna, we appreciate having you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to talking about the industry and appreciate the warm welcome.
Absolutely. We'll just get right into it. We had come up with questions. When we came up with these questions, we tried to speak with the community. I know you're a man who has always had almost an open door policy to hear people's perspective, and you always take that information in. And I know you've always applied that to how the agency has progressed. So some of these questions, like I said, is based on the feedback from our audience. First question: when you zoom out and you look at Michigan's cannabis market today, what do you think people outside the industry most misunderstand about the CRA's role?
Yeah, appreciate that question. Yeah, a couple things. We do a lot of listening, a lot of communications, and during that time, we use that as an opportunity to say, what's in our authority and what's not in our authority. So, for example, some civic issues when it comes to law changes, we do not have the authority to change laws. So that's going to be a combination of both the legislative branch and the executive branch, essentially the legislature and the governor working together on moving bills and signing bills into law. What we do is we, along with stakeholders in the community, we advise policymakers on things that are things that we're noticing, things that we're seeing. But one of the things that I'd say, regularly misunderstood for is that we can just systematically change law. We cannot. Some laws that we administer that we are regulators for require higher thresholds of votes in legislature than others, like the MRTMA requires 3/4 vote to amend that. And so just educating and getting on the same page with people. I think some of the other things that were misunderstood about is, for example, the cost of the lab. The lab that we look forward to talking about today in this conversation costs $2.8 million to get started and is a running of $1.5 million each year appropriate. And those are monies that the licensees have paid for. There's some volumes, numbers of, I'd say, projection numbers that are out there in the atmosphere that are not quite where they really are. I would suggest people take a look at the appropriations budget that are appropriated each year, and they can look at the funding lines. One of the figures that we heard is the lab cost approximately $30 million. That's not the case. That's actually close to our actual operating budget for the entire agency for all the programs we administer. So 2.8 million to get started, 1.5 for each year to keep going. And we look forward to talking about the lab too. But I'd say it's along with those lines. But look, that's part of our job, is to have these conversations and listen to stakeholders and get on the same page and come to common understanding. So for us, this is just a regular part of our duties. And we think it's important to open communications and get on the same page with people.
100%. Harry, what do you think?
First of all, Director Hanna, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join our small little podcast with, hopefully 10 subscribers, but hopefully we'll have a few more after this one. But the Michigan market has experienced rapid expansion. What what steps is the CRA taking right now to help stabilize the industry long term? There have been some talks on maybe a moratorium. I'm not sure if that's something that would require a 3/4 supermajority vote or not, but what would it take to get that?
So a couple things. A moratorium, you're talking about law changes. You're talking about actual things that would need to happen in the acts themselves. And again, amending the MRTMA, which is the Adult Use Act, requires 3/4 vote in legislature. We've been pretty plain about this. This is a conversation that has been happening for quite some time, and we completely understand it. We're not the only state that are going through some of these things. For example, Oregon was the first state to implement a moratorium or a licensing capping after having an open free market system like ours. For example, if you look at Colorado's prices of marijuana, average, actually median ounce, is $38. That's the median price right now for an ounce in Colorado. And so these things happen in these environments where you have a free market system, where you have a lot of competition. At the same time, businesses get better with their product and find better efficiencies to grow better and bigger and more product. So for a licensing cap or a moratorium, it would take a law change. From the CRA's perspective, is again, communicate with stakeholders. If this is something the industry wants, You got to talk to lawmakers. We have no problem being at the table to help shape what we can do architecturally to make sure that we can actually do it operationally. But again, that's a policy decision that really the stakeholders and lawmakers need to have conversations about. And so we know that there's bill proposals and there's conversations happening to this day. We remain committed to say, what is operationally possible. I'll give you an example. So Oregon, when they instituted their moratorium a few years ago, they experienced 1,000% increase in applications right before that period closed. If we experience 1,000% increase in applications right before that time period ends, we do not have the capacity to meet the statutorily obligated timeline to make a licensing determination within 90 days, which is in the MRTMA. So that's kind of an example of if that were to happen, and we continue to be committed to these conversations, that would be something to say, if there's going to be a license cap, that's something that we cannot have a 90-day limitation on making these application decisions if we get 1,000% increase in applications, right? I mean, that's just not possible for us to implement. So
Sure.
that's an example of that. And then as far as, looking at the economics, we track that information. I highly recommend everybody, shameless plug, go to michigan.gov/CRA, where we put up monthly statistics on a regular basis, typically around the 15th, 16th. We just put up February statistics today, so that is fresh information that is out there. The average wholesale price of marijuana just increased a little bit on the adult use side. But highly recommend people take a look at that information. We look at that information. And again, our powers, if you will, as regulators, as bureaucrats, is determined by the acts of which that we're responsible for. And then any kind of changes of acts that tell us what we can and can't do would, again, be part of that legislative and eventual potential signing by the governor through that legislative making process.
Regulatory authority is something I don't think the general public tends to understand. And I think when we look at how whatever industry, how the regulatory authority is granted to oil industry, whatever industry we want to talk about, it's actually very, very specific. And it tends to be that way by design, because the legislation, once passed, they try and hash a lot of these issues out before anything's ever even brought to light. So it's very specific. And I think when we talk about the market maturing and just legislation on its own is a living, breathing animal, and tends to be we need to update these things every now and again. In Michigan, because of the supermajority, that could make it difficult, unless we have a really bipartisan effort. And I know sometimes you guys get stuck in the middle of those conversations, and people try and assume that you might be able to do things that you can't. And I think that's not just specific to you. That's any regulator.
Yeah, it's part of the administrative process. There are limits to which what we can do, which is part of essentially regulations, right? The laws essentially create the guidelines of what a regulatory body that is designated as that administrator to enact those laws and create those regulations. Those are typically in law, and I'm talking federal, state, big picture. Those are typically vague on purpose, so that the administrator has the flexibility of creating the rules that are within those limits. But again, we can't step outside those limits. If we step outside those limits, that's instant litigation. That is a situation in which that people can find themselves litigating against the regulatory body for acting outside of their regulatory limits, and that's not a situation we want to be in. Obviously, litigation in this space is something that everybody takes note of. When you look at things from a director perspective of operations and moving an agency ahead, you're looking at risk-based litigation of knowing that, there may be a litigation possibility, but it also affects operations, right? And so if there's an opportunity in which that we can stay within the limits that we need to, we're following the law, which is very important and something that we value and treasure as Americans. But at the same time, it's also having conversations and trying to figure out how to move things ahead. But yes, to your point, for example, there are sometimes people say, CRA, why aren't you doing anything about the gas station that is selling illegal marijuana products? We don't have that authority. We have regulatory authority on licensees. And so we do share information with Michigan State Police in accordance with the acts that says that we can do so. But again, we have to operate within our limits that are prescribed by law. Interesting fact too of supermajority. It's not impossible. In fact, if you look at the bills that were passed by the House this year alone, 68% of them passed with supermajority, where they didn't even require supermajority. So it is possible. And again, it's through stakeholder comments, stakeholder feedback. The public meetings, we really treasure those, getting the feedback from everybody coming out. We've got one coming up here in a couple days on Thursday at 10:30. Another shameless plug. But again, working with lawmakers is part of that democratic process that we value and treasure. And we look forward to further conversations with everybody to see how we can move things ahead.
100%. Again, I think these are all valid. Communication is one of the most important things, I think, in government. And it's also the most misunderstood thing that gets us into trouble, right? Is just poor communication. And I think that's just the system. And a lot of times, I think some things that we mean to communicate on and agree with sometimes get lost in translation. And that's what these forums and these meetings and comments and public comments, because at the end of the day, it's representative of the people and their voice. So, without them, there would be no government. So I think that's a very fair assessment. Harry, what do you got?
You know, um, from Director Hanna, from your perspective, what separates a healthy cannabis market from one that's heading towards trouble?
It's a really good question. I see things from a national perspective. So I'm on the board of the Cannabis Regulatory Association, Canada, and I'm able to see trends and things that are happening in other states at the same time with what's happening in Michigan. And it's from my perspective, I see things happening on cyclical type things that seem to be familiar. You have a program that starts out rapid growth and then consolidation, overproduction, a reckoning in the market, things like that. That seems to be happening in many states. Now, some states start out with a capped environment where that is controlled from that perspective, but then you have perspectives that are plus and minus for both of these different types of models, right? You have the free market model, and then you have the eventual race to the bottom. That's happening in a lot of states. Michigan is not different. But then you also have the other model that is capped from the very beginning. But then you have arguments, positive, negative for that, of potential accusations of potential monopolies, etc. So, from my perspective, what I tell fellow regulators across the United States is we're going through a lot of the similar things, just on different timelines. So, some things that are happening in Michigan may be happening in other states either soon or very soon. And so, again, look at what happened with Oregon with their moratorium and then their second version of that. There's conversations of that possibility in the state of Michigan, or those that may desire that. Look at people not paying each other. This is a national thing. So the bottom line is, from my perspective, a lot of these things are happening across the country until we have solid federal guidance, essentially, that supports banking, right? Eliminating the large oversupply of cash and having these businesses target for criminal activity, which is really unfortunate and puts people at risk, right? That we pay attention to. Until we get some kind of federal guidance and infrastructure that has some form of predictability and guidance from the federal government, I think you're going to continue to see essentially these different state patchworks that go through similar things. And so what we can do is we can control what we can control. We are definitely paying attention to what's happening in the federal government. As of right now, the rescheduling executive order, we have not seen much other than there appears to be movement from the FDA potentially coming out with guidance about CBD, which just hit the internet from their site a couple days ago. They haven't published what they're going to do, but something we're going to be paying attention to. But yes, the different states and economic fluctuations. Some of these you can say, hey, in this state in this year, we'll go through something similar like us. So it's something we pay attention to, something we have conversations with policymakers on. There are some things that we can control, and there are some things that we rely on basically stakeholders and policymakers to make further decisions on.
One thing I want to point out about something that you said is, the cap on licenses. Obviously, um, the state didn't have a cap on licenses, especially excess grow licenses. Didn't happen on your watch, but it's something that you have to navigate through. But I think it's hard to disagree that the largest, contributor to why we are where we're at is really, um, each municipality has their own discretion of what they feel is an appropriate amount of licensees, whether it's cultivation, outdoor, indoor, retail, whatever it may be. So, you know, although you guys allowed them to have as many licenses as they want, ultimately they were the decision makers on how many they felt was right for their community. So you can't really blame, you know, the state for that one, because, you know, the municipalities are really uh, making the final decision.
Yeah, so in one way you can look at it, the municipalities are a big gatekeeper, right, of how many license types can operate in a certain area. We, again, back to law, some of the things that we educate about, we do not have the authority to cap licenses in the way that the laws are written right now. So if a business meets the applicant determination of the municipality and they meet the requirements of the state, they shall be issued a license. And in accordance with the adult use law, we got to make a 90-day determination to do that, right? So we're very metrics
Absolutely.
focused. We're very, proud of how fast we are responding. We're typically within the 35 to 40-day timeline of making these determinations because, again, we don't want to be the cog in the wheel of the functioning of what we're supposed to be doing of holding up an application. But to your point, what do you do about that? So one, we educate and say, we don't have the ability to cap licenses at the state level. Policymakers and lawmakers have conversations about that, but we also have conversations with municipalities. We have a summit every single quarter. We're very proud of that work that we do. It's an opportunity for us to get on the same page as municipalities. There's over 1,000 of them, and there's one of us, right? And it's how do you get everybody together? Well, some of the positives of 2026 in the last couple of years, we have these capabilities where we can talk remotely, and so we have a remote opportunity to talk to municipalities and try to get on the same page of what we can do, and also educate the limits of what we have. Talk about our disciplinary process, talk about questions they may have, but as an opportunity to educate municipalities, at least from our perspective, and then hear theirs too. So with the new rules, and I know that we'll potentially talk about that here pretty soon, the new rules are going to have clarification on that access license. So there's going to be a consolidation, if you will, in a phase out of that license. And that's based off of, communicating with external stakeholders, including our own staff, on what operationally makes the most sense. But there are some really cool things coming out with this new rule set that we're really excited about to talk about once they're getting close to JCAR.
You spent the time on it. I know, being on the Consumer Connections group, we've talked about it for a long time, and I think the feedback was provided by just about everybody on multiple fronts for many, many months. So I think that attention to detail definitely is going to bring about some important changes, and I know we appreciate that. And that kind of segues us into our next question. When we have this new market and we have these new rules and we have this new legislation, um, we talk about enforcement. We talk about the rules, ensuring that the rules that were provided per the legislation are being followed, and it has to be tracked. And so how has your background in the military and law enforcement influenced the way you think about regulation versus the enforcement in the cannabis world? I think more on the front of maybe a law enforcement perspective. They're similar, but not necessarily the same.
Yeah, I appreciate the question and the opportunity. There's a lot of things going on. From my background, I'm proud to say that I've been with this agency for the most part for close to 9 years. I was really attracted to, as a leadership challenge, to do something that no one else has ever done before. We're all pioneers in this: stakeholders, consumers, licensees, and the industry, and also the agency that regulates it. So that was very, very cool thing to be a part of, and still a cool thing to be a part of. When I joined 9 years ago, we had no policies or procedures for anything enforcement wise, and so enforcement is a part of regulations. My background is really heavy in the counterterrorism environment, um, and that helps in a lot of the enforcement things that we've been doing. But also, I think our agency and myself, along with Andrew Brisboe, our previous director, really value customer service listening. For example, one of the misunderstandings is that, yes, we do have disciplinary action in this state, but we do more education than we do actual fines and revocations of licenses. Just since January, we did over 408 educational warnings to educate the licensees about potential metric issues, as opposed to finding discipline right off the bat. There's some other things that I'm sure we'll talk about that we put out there education wise. We have 159 education sessions that live on our website in perpetuity that anybody can go on our website and look at any moment and watch these educational videos. We're proud of that. I think that's part of my background too, is essentially listening to feedback and saying, okay, there's a need here. How do we fill that need? And we think we do that with education sessions. We're going to have more. We average at least 2 to 3 a month. And we're the only regulatory body of cannabis in the United States that do these education sessions. And quite frankly, I don't know many other agencies that do education sessions on a regular basis that bring in other agencies, banks, insurance groups. There's opportunities for us to come to common understandings in such a new atmosphere. And I think all that really comes to part of not just my background, but our team's background. We really do care. We do care about the businesses, how to support the businesses at the same time, balancing that with protecting consumer health and safety. And, we've had instances where not everybody has the consumer health and safety of the consumers at the best of their focus. But that's not everybody. That's a small percentage, right? The majority of the industry is trying to do the right thing and follow these rules. These rules are complicated. The methods of which that they're tracked in the system is also an educational opportunity too. And so it's just trying to move things ahead and listening to everybody and getting those forward. But we're excited about these new rules. We really are. And I know that we'll probably talk about those here in a second, but to go back to your question, all that's part of my background and our backgrounds. We really do care about doing this thing the best to our abilities, doing it legally, and listening and trying to get things moving to where they should be. And that includes taking a lot of feedback and analyzing those. And we spent the better part of 3 years on our new rule set. And we took a really radical approach. We started out by getting public feedback to get that started. Did it extend the timeline? Yeah, it did. So it, on the negative, yeah, it's taken some time, but we're very, very happy that pretty soon, once it's done, it's going to save businesses money. At the same time, it's going to increase consumer health and safety at the end of the day.
That's hard to argue with. And I think, Harry, what do you, the rules, that's a perfect segue into that is obviously one of the hot topic questions. People are wondering what's in there. So I guess if you want to kind of skim over what the highlights are that you can share that you think either the consumers, the businesses, what are some of the things we got coming down the pipe that's going to be a positive for us?
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. So we're very close. We're at the last step of the final review with Michigan Office of Administrative Hearings. Once that review comes back to us, we'll make whatever changes they are format-wise, essentially is what the review is for. And then it'll go to the Joint Committee for Rulemaking, JCAR. And so that's going to be happening here this year, pretty soon. And then most of the rule changes, which again are going to be very beneficial for the businesses, they'll take effect 6 months after the fact. The whole intent was to have an educational period. We have education sessions, gives our staff time to understand the new rules, gives our staff time to, believe it or not, in the back end, we have to make architectural software changes for our inspection equipment to meet with the new rules. But it gives us all an opportunity to understand what they are. We're going to do education sessions. We're excited about some of the capabilities that are going to be in these new rules. For example, we're finally going to have an opportunity to recycle these vape pens, these vape cartridges, for sustainment, for everybody. It just makes sense to have some kind of recycling capability. Gone are going to be the days of having an extra lobby in a retailer, unless a municipality requires it. It's 2026. I understand that back in 2018, when the original intent of lawmakers and the rules that we promulgated, we felt there would be an opportunity to have a requirement for a lobby. But you know what? That's a lot of extra money when you're starting out for a brand new build. We listened to feedback and said, you know what? We really don't need that anymore unless a municipality requires that, right? So that's something that we think is going to be very positive for the industry. At the same time, we are going to address remediation. Now, remediation is a controversial subject. Depending on who you talk to, it's kind of like when you walk into a room, it's a very Pepsi Coke argument. We understand the arguments from all these various different points of view of remediation, what defines remediation, what point of which it's used on the product, before testing, after, all these different things. We understand all those conversations. And so there's going to be an opportunity, and I'll just say it here now, after all the feedback and public comment, that in the new rules that are going to go to JCAR, licensees that do not use remediation are going to have the opportunity to plainly put that on their labeling that this product is not remediated. Now, on the flip side, those that do remediation are not going to be able to use that label, but that will inform essentially the user to know what is having a remediation-free product. Now, the other topic is, what's remediation? There's a lot of different things of what remediation could be. We define that in this new rule set. We took a lot of information from other countries, other states, feedback from consumers, you name it, licensees, stakeholders, as many as we possibly could. And so I understand that there are those that want something different. I understand there are those that don't want any change. We felt that this is the best approach as of right now with the scientific information that we currently have. And we'll talk about the lab later that we hope to get open here pretty soon that has an opportunity for scientific advancement too. But the rule set is also going to give us some strengthened enforcement capabilities. I don't like talking about, some of the things that we didn't win in court, but I'm just being real. 2 years ago, we lost a court case. That's the last time we lost a court case enforcement wise was 2 years ago. And our summary suspension language right now is just not suffice. It's very difficult for us to summarily suspend a license. This new rule set addresses that. There's also proposed legislation that may even happen first before the rule set is promulgated. At the end of the day, we're looking for some tools so that we want to support those that are doing the right thing, following the rules, trying to follow the rules. We know there's some shenanigans still going on. We want to stop the shenanigans effectively, limit the whack-a-mole approach, and really get us into a place that's more stable so we can support those on an even playing field.
Eric, what do you got on that? That was a lot.
I'm glad the remediation is being addressed. And that's obviously been a open-ended topic for quite some time. Whether it's going to say this product is not remediated or nothing on there, that will clearly define, and help people understand, what they're putting, what they're putting in their system. So that's going to help some people and probably hurt some people on the business side. But I guess it's safe to assume that we've all smoked something remediated, and maybe we won't. Maybe we'll choose not to now. And at least we'll be informed. And I'm sure between remediation and other things that might still be happening in the space as it pertains to, I know the state banned MCT oil a little while ago, but do you think that that's still, how much of that is still happening, do you think?
Yeah, in converted products, right?
Yeah.
We're banning converted product immediately once this new rule set comes out. We're excited about that too. It's So it goes back to the lab, right? So there are some key things that we believe need to happen here pretty soon to help the businesses and help the consumers, right? Again, that's our mission. We will be a national model, protect businesses, support businesses, support businesses, but protect consumer health and safety. There is a group of things that we need. We need that lab running. So I'm happy to report that our reference lab is fully built and fully staffed. We are excited about that. And so what they're doing right now is they're working on SOP development. They're even working on, I got an update just today that they're working on the actual program for auditing technical audits of the licensed labs. And we want to collaborate with the labs, but at the same time, scientifically validate that what they're doing is scientifically based. And we hear complaints that there are still labs out there that are doing things they shouldn't be doing. This is going to be an important tool to advance scientific knowledge in this space, support good science that protects, at the end of the day, consumer health and safety. In this laboratory, the reason why we haven't opened it yet is we wanted to make sure we're working with lawmakers to make it clear in the law that we have the ability to possess marijuana, our staff, to do this testing. As an administrator, we have staff that it's my obligation, our obligation, to protect our staff from possible interdiction from, other governments. And having that capability in the law makes it pretty clear, right? It will be in the rules, but we think having in the law is an important step for protecting our staff. And at the same time, evidentiary value that comes from, whatever we find in the lab. The lab is going to be very important in helping to, again, confirm that and support the labs that are doing the right thing, and also for identifying those that are potentially doing things for pure profit. And this is a national issue. This isn't just a Michigan issue. And from my perspective, and for many that regulate marijuana, I talk to fellow regulators all the time. When you're a regulator of cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to say, you are either wanting a reference lab, or you have one and you're trying to get one. And we're very fortunate that we have one. We're looking forward to operating. For those that support us to possess marijuana, to operate this lab, I highly recommend talking to your lawmakers. And we're getting close for that to be put out on the House floor. There's also a version of the Senate that just passed as well. So we'll look forward to getting this up and running, something the licensees already paid for, and this is constructed. We saved a lot of money by doing it in the same building that we have our headquarters in. We saved money by bringing in equipment and staging it in advance. So we're not ordering it now in other economic pressure times, right? So the lab is very important, what we think, for moving ahead and confirming or denying. And we're going to be able to do a lot of different things with this thing. We're going to be able to, support our investigations. Right now, we do feel for the labs that support us in our investigations. They're paying to support our investigations on potential other licensees out of their own pockets. This will eliminate that. This will give us the opportunity to do research with the licensees and other regulators across the United States to come up with testing methodology that typically we would be getting from the federal government, but because of its illegality at the federal level, we don't have that support. So we're not going to come out right out the gate with testing methods to say this is how you shall test X, Y, and Z. We'll have similar parameters that we do with the current rules. But 5-10 years, we would like to get to a golden standard of working with the licensees, stakeholders, scientific community, consumers, everybody, and other states to say this is what the testing methodology should be. So I kind of jumped the question a little bit, talk about labs. I'm excited to talk about it, but this thing is ready to go here. We're just waiting for the capability to possess marijuana to start our validations.
Well, we're looking forward, to seeing how that helps improve the industry and get some get some of the things that are not helping the industry either corrected or removed. But I recently saw that in 2025, and for the first time since legalization here in Michigan, that there was actually a decline in total number of licensees, um, and um, which is currently at about 2,200. And I also understand that about 940 cannabis licenses that have been issued since legalization are no longer active. Um, Obviously, there's still a major oversupply. It seems like if 20% of the production, went away, retail prices might still not change that much. What does right sizing this industry look like to you?
Yeah, good question. So we talked about this actually last week at Senate Appropriations. Looking at the statistics right now, we still have nearly 2 times the amount of product than retail. Just looking at the license numbers, it's clear that we have an oversupply in this area. And again, it's a symptom of having more grows, twice as many more grows than you have really retail and processors that have been pretty much stagnant. At least on when we're looking at the statistics, you meant 2,200. We're looking at it. We're combining the medical licenses too, because there's a lot of medical grows on that side as well. We have provision centers about 95 right now, but we're monitoring the current situation. It's part of this is what's happening in the economy of the marijuana industry in the state of Michigan. On top of that, too, it goes back into that conversation of, hey, lawmakers, when we're talking to lawmakers and stakeholders, if there is some kind of policy decision on limits to certain license types, now's the time to have those conversations. And again, we just want to be at the table to let us know what we can do operationally. At the same time, this again is something that has happened in other states that started with medical first, then went to adult use. Some states were fortunate enough to combine their acts. I know that we went through some similar efforts, but they haven't quite gone into fruition yet. You want to talk about bureaucratic red tape, combining those two laws into one, at least operationally from our perspective and from the business's perspective, makes sense. There's differences between those two acts that I think that would be beneficial for the licensed environment to have just one set of laws, one set of rules. But again, the devil's in the details, and working out those is very important with the licensees, the stakeholders, the consumers, the licensees, lawmakers, all of us working together and having those conversations. Pay attention again to the current status of the state. Again, it's akin to other states that had a free market type approach with the explosion, and now there's an overproduction environment. At the same time, enforcement wise, we're paying attention to diversion, but also diversion. There were previous litigation situations with states that were having diversion issues. We have not been litigated by other states yet that do not have programs, but it's something that we pay attention to as well. And so all of those things we look at holistically. But again, we're constrained by the fact that if somebody qualifies for a license, we shall issue that license. And at the same time, we're proud of, and I'm probably skipping on other, question types, but, we're proud of the social equity grant program. That is something that, as a state, we started being appropriated $1 million each year since 2024. We're in our year 3 of the social equity grant program. We're proud of that. That's something that we've instituted with stakeholders and getting their feedback, and did it from scratch. We didn't even have the program before. But that is an opportunity that does give money back to social equity businesses that they can spend on business needs, community reinvestment, or, which is also cool, education for their employees, right? And so those are monies that we're proud of administrating and working with licensees to get those information and those capabilities out there. But Harry, back to your question, it's continue to monitor and report. And again, some of these capabilities are outside of our control. If there are policy decisions that those would like to change the licensing scheme, there's an opportunity to talk to lawmakers and have these further conversations.
Yeah, appreciate that answer. Lots of companies are closing and or downsizing. You hear that there's approximately 40 to 45,000 jobs in this industry. I know licensees are supposed to report to the CRA when an employee gets fired or or quits, and many don't report this. A lot of people, aren't really sure exactly how many people are employed in this industry. What can the CRA do to help get more accurate employment data?
Yeah, a couple things. So we switched to unannounced inspections back in October of 2024. Part of that is important for this topic, but also, that's the standard for the food industry. Some of the things that we're doing are piggybacking off of federal laws for foods, because at some point there's going to be consolidation where those are the standards, right? The CFRs, the 21 CFRs, those are the federal standards, good manufacturing practices, et cetera. And so we piggybacked on some of those things for our rules and our current rules and the ones that are coming up here pretty soon. But the importance of that is to, again, have the marijuana industry essentially evolve into what will potentially could be a federal regulatory involvement, FDA, whatever it may be in the future. But at some point, um, that is something that is quite possible. And what better way to do that than, copy some of the federal laws that are similar to food, and also at the same time protecting consumer health and safety for those that are consuming these edible products, right? Just like foods. Even though technically marijuana is not food, but we're treating it with the same, standards. When it comes to the unannounced inspections, part of that was because that's the standard in other industries. We want the industry to evolve, to be self-reliant and inspection ready at all times. Part of that is when we do our inspections, we're looking to see that people have made the metric changes in accordance with the rules. They have the 7 days to add or subtract people that have left the environment. I'd say the numbers are pretty accurate because of the unannounced inspections and holding essentially the licensees through that process of educating to say that this needs to be done. Now, have we had discipline? Sure, there has been discipline. There has been educational moments as well, but we're pretty confident with those numbers. But we have seen the numbers. Harry, you're right. We've reached kind of like the top of the roller coaster, and it's descending a little bit in the past couple months. Anecdotally, information that we're hearing in the media, attributed to the wholesale tax. But at the end of the day, we do have figures as well. We've had receiverships in this environment for the past couple of years. I did ask our staff to come up with some information. So we've had about 10% of the companies that have reported receiverships have actually come out of it. 30% of the receiverships have closed, and the remaining 60% are still under receivership. We've had, last count, we have about 16 companies under receivership currently. As far as if you count the medical and adult use licenses numbers total, which is just short of 4,000, you got 16 companies with various licenses attached to that are under receivership right now. So we've had some that have come out of it. But again, these are the things that we're paying attention to and reporting out. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the accuracy of the employment information and the accuracy of metric information, we do a combination of education and unannounced inspections and some discipline from time to time to make sure those metric numbers are as accurate as they possibly can be.
Great. Without any, without talking about any specific investigations, what can you tell us about what's happening in border towns? Obviously, they make up a big chunk of our sales in the state of Michigan from out of town people. What uh, what can you tell us about non-compliant multiple transaction sales, and how how people can work within what's allowed?
Yeah, appreciate that question. From looking at things from what has come across my desk, because again, I'm the final decision maker at the end of the day. So I appreciate, I can't really go into current things. A lot of things I don't know until they come to me at the very end. Typically, we're getting contacted by law enforcement, usually from other states, that will reach out to us after the fact of a traffic stop and say, for example, we have an X individual that has a plethora of product that's way over the state possession limits in accordance with the MRTMA. And if you go back a couple of years, we kind of had a hands-off approach to these multiple transactions. Recently, we had a licensee reach out to us to say, hey, look, the law says this and your rules say that, and that person was right. And so, in accordance with consulting with our attorneys, we made the educational in the beginning announcement of, hey, look, possession limits beyond what MRTA may prescribe, potentially at a certain limit, is criminal in nature. And at the same time, licensees have a requirement to report to us criminal activity in the rules. Now, that obviously we're understanding of that puts the businesses and interest in perspective, and plus those that are watching here today, we do pay attention to Reddit on Michigans, so we are watching that there, and this is a big topic there of what do you expect the licensees to snitch on their customers? Look, what we're doing as a regulatory body is saying this is what the law says and this is what the rules say. What is coming to us typically is from law enforcement interdiction after the fact, and then we look at it after the fact. Do we have undercover operations of CRA making sure that each sale is being done in accordance with people having the right amount on their carry? No, we are not. Have we had disciplinary action? Yes, we have. Are their fines high compared to our other fines? No, they're not. But it puts Michigan in an interesting space, particularly when you look at what happened with Colorado when they were litigated by other states that didn't have marijuana programs and litigated Colorado for the diversion of that product. And so, when you have law enforcement calling us up and saying, hey, look, we found a person with X amount of product that's beyond what's allowed in your state laws, we're obligated at that point to take a look at it based off the totality of circumstances. So we're aware of that. We know that there's different thoughts and feelings on this. The bottom line is this. Until the law or the rules are changed, the CRA is doing what we're administratively supposed to be doing.
So with that, that's obviously license related. Just yesterday, there was a report of a black market or unregulated market bust of almost 1,000 pounds of flour and tens of thousands of vape pens, and how much of a problem are people like this creating for the license industry and just the caregiver market in general?
Yeah, a couple things. So that's a lot, right? And for the businesses that are paying the overhead costs, the taxes, the licensing fees, all these different things, they're being cheated by those that are not following those rules, right? We don't have jurisdiction over that. We do pay attention to those. We see the news just like everybody else. We do have a very good working relationship with our Michigan State Police partners where we get tips all the time. And look, it's not somebody's responsibility to know whether or not CRA can or cannot handle a certain tip. We appreciate the tips. We handle these tips and we process them. If they are criminal in nature and outside the licensed environment, we pass those to our Michigan State Police partners that have that authority. The piece where we may get involved is if there is a licensee that is in both worlds. So if there's a licensee that is potentially doing activity that's outside the licensed environment, we will get involved if we're made aware of that. And there have been instances of which that we have. And that's why it requires a good working relationship with the Michigan State Police, which is afforded to us in the acts, and we have a good partnership there. But with that too, we pay attention to that. We're aware of the comments and the thoughts of the wholesale tax and whether or not that will, push more illicit behavior. I will say this: the wholesale tax right now, it's a little early from our perspective to fully evaluate what the effect is. It's March, right? The Treasury is, going to publish their RAB soon if they haven't done so already. I haven't checked my email lately, but they're looking to put out that guidance here pretty soon. It's early to tell the full implications of that wholesale tax on economic, also with illicit activity. But I will say this: environments that have adult use programs, every state is dealing with an illicit environment in which other businesses are reporting, or we hear from, activity from law enforcement that functions that are outside of the law, criminal activity, potential human and trafficking implications as well. Those things exist parallel to the regulated market, and there needs to be an enforcement response. And so we're proud of our law enforcement partners that are taking care of those. But this is something that we are seeing. And look, I'll just be upfront and real. This also involves transnational criminal organizations that we have seen in the state of Michigan that are happening in other states as well, like Maine and California and up the West Coast. So at the end of the day, it's working with partners, handling information that we can handle, good intelligence sharing. Also, at the same time, informing lawmakers of what our capabilities are and what law enforcement may need, and hooking up law enforcement and prosecutors with lawmakers and stakeholders. We do know that there's considerations in the House right now of potential changes to MRTMA for penalties. From our perspective, we're more of a shaper of this is, what amount of pounds could be if you, translate that appropriate. But that's a conversation of really stakeholders and licensees and everybody to get together with lawmakers to figure out what Michigan's law should be. There are those that think it should be fine. There are those that think that nobody should go to jail for weed. And there are those that are growing 100,000 plants in a warehouse and looking at a misdemeanor. What the policy should be in the state of Michigan at the end of the day is something that all Michiganders, in our opinion, should be interested about and talking to lawmakers about.
Director Hanna, I have one final question for you, and it kind of is on the opposite end of the spectrum, and this came directly from the community as well. When we talk about diversion and criminal activity, on the flip side, we have a very legal market when it comes to hemp. When we talk about the farm bill and the amendments to the farm bill, and how hemp has penetrated not only the cannabis market, but I can go to Walmart and get CBD and hemp related stuff. But we've seen the issues with untested or converted cannabinoids, making people sick and children getting a hold of it, and all these issues have kind of popped up. And one of the questions that I see is, well, why, as a licensee, a cannabis licensee, where I'm paying my licensing fees, why do I also have to get a hemp processing license? Or why can I just go to Walmart and buy CBD? Why don't they need a hemp license? Or this is a unique issue. And it's not only unique to Michigan, where we have a legal market, but to other markets as well. What can you speak on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. The 2018 Farm Bill created loopholes to drive a truck through, created a national issue that Michigan is definitely a part of. There's a lot of different aspects about this. And so I have no problem. I'm not time constrained, so I can keep going. This is a long answer. So a couple of things. One, we're aware of those that are importing intoxicating hemp products that may be legal under the current definition of the 2018 Farm Bill. And we know that those are potentially getting in the hands of children, which nobody wants that. That is not something that is acceptable. The federal government did just make a law change to reopen government in the fall, in November of 2025, and that takes effect as of right now, November of 2026, unless Congress makes changes. But as of right now, there hasn't been the proposed changes that have really gone very far. And those changes are essentially the big one is the package limit of 0.4 milligrams of THC per package is the limit to be considered hemp. Now, myself, along with our staff, have been saying for quite some time now that Michigan's hemp laws need to be amended. They need to be changed. They have not kept up with what has happened across the United States, and including what's been happening in the state of Michigan with the 2018 Farm Bill. They have not. So Senate Bill 599, we work with lawmakers on. We continue to have discussions about. That is the big piece of what we think is a Michigan answer, if you will, on amending our hemp laws. And so let's say, per se, that comes into effect. I'm speaking hypothetically now, along with the federal law change that is potentially going to come into effect in November. So right now, the Michigan Senate Bill 599 has a 1.75 milligrams per container limit of THC, whereas the federal limit is 0.4 milligrams. The federal one is much stricter. There are those that have the feelings and thoughts and sentiments that Michigan's 1.75 is also too strict. There are conversations about this that is quite similar to remediation on its controversy. But at the end of the day, we need some kind of framework that are a better set of laws to reel this in. One of the comments that we typically get often from attorneys about the MRTMA is, the CRA could have put out rules about limits to intoxicating hemp. Why haven't you done so? Part of the reason is, well, those are THC molecules only. As you know, people have created other molecules that are not THC and called them hemp. And at the same time, in the egregious cases, not everybody, right, for everyone watching, but in some egregious cases, there are those that are creating intoxicating products that are really doing experimentation on human beings without any oversight of whether or not these things are safe. And then you put that on top of improper age gating, and some of these things potentially get in the hands of children that just click a button on the internet. So there's a couple things. One, what is federal enforcement going to look like should this law that passed last year come into effect in November? That is a big question mark. What are the feds going to do? Are they really going to take an aggressive stance on limiting essentially intoxicating products that are claimed to be hemp or were hemp at one point, were now not in coordination with the federal law? Two, the progress of the Michigan bill for hemp changes. Under that bill, essentially to create a framework that we would regulate non-intoxicating hemp products, put that through a statewide monitoring system, and essentially have those that create these products go through testing and make sure that they're as safe as they possibly can be. That is one of the goals of that proposed legislation. And it really focuses on the manufacturers and not really the sellers. The next piece is what does the state do with these internet sales of what will be definitely not legal from the federal perspective and potentially the state perspective once Senate Bill 599 turns into actual law. But again, it's waiting at the House. It moved out of the Senate, and what variation could that be? At the same time, you also have to keep in the back of your mind these explosion of intoxicating beverages, THC beverages, is a thing. Like, it is a big deal. These hemp beverages, intoxicating beverages, THC beverages, whatever flavor you want to, I guess, pun intended, what you want to call these things, that's a big deal. There are those that in the alcohol industry want to acquire and sell these. There are states that are creating frameworks or looking to create frameworks. Michigan's had discussions. We may head down there, but at that point, again, I recommend stakeholders communicate with lawmakers. What that looks, we'll see, but it is a big thing that consumers, A, want these beverages, but also B, at the same time, alcohol sales are down across the country. And so the alcohol industry is looking at ways to get into this. At the same time, we have a marijuana industry, right? And how does the marijuana industry interact with this? These are discussions that are happening real time that will continue to develop. At the end of the day, we have a framework for the marijuana industry. There needs to be an upgraded framework for the hemp side as well. And to your point, we're hopefully going to get to a point where it makes sense why somebody has the registration. It makes sense that we have some kind of product that we can stand behind that we can say is safe for consumption. We do know also at the same time there are labs throughout the entire United States that some are doing things the right ways and some are creating COAs that are just blatantly not real, right? So there's a lot of things to fix. We're paying attention to the feds. At the same time, we're working with lawmakers and stakeholders, encourage them to work with lawmakers as well to figure out what the hemp package should be in the state of Michigan. So we have some kind of framework that makes sense and is enforceable. But at the same time, we have industrial hemp processor in development under the ISRDA industrial hemp processor handler licenses. We are doing inspections on those. We are putting the licensee information as they get renewed on our website. So we are starting to do that under the current law, but that law it's missing some things that we think that we need as a regulatory body and as a state. And so, great question. It's a long answer. I could probably talk for 2 hours about that,
That's
but
okay.
we appreciate.
People, this is what people want to hear because they have questions, and this is part of the communication process. And we've covered a lot of different topics that I know are on the top of everybody's mind. Kind of wrapping things up here. Like if you were speaking to the audience who are consumers, licensees, or whatever, is there anything else you'd like to put out there, or that you feel is on the horizon, or that you just want people to know from the CRA's perspective?
Yeah, we're excited about these new rules getting in front of JCAR. And we think at the end of the day, these things are, look, it's taken some time because we're consolidating them. There are a lot of duplications in our current rule set. We did a lot of work to consolidate that too. We think that we have an opportunity to save businesses money at the same time, do the best that we can to uphold consumer health and safety with this new rule set. We're excited about that. We're excited about getting this lab up and running. We really are. There was a really good Gongware article that just came out on Friday that basically said, hey, look, we're ready to go. We just want to make sure that we have this in the law that we can possess the marijuana. We look for support in that. We think this lab is going to really do great things. We're really excited about it. We got a great director running it, Claire Patterson, great staff. They really care about the mission. I walk in there, there's lab coats and gizmos and things all over the place. It's really cool to see, but we really look forward to implementing that, protect consumer health and safety, protect the labs that are doing the right thing, advance science. And we know there's shenanigans going on with this new rule set. You're looking for some, increased enforcement capabilities to put an end to that. Let's stabilize this market from those that are doing the egregious stuff. Let's, with the new rule set, get these converted products out of the market, and let's move forward. And we're excited to do that. And it's on the horizon. And a lot of work, policy work, and a lot of conversations with stakeholders is coming to fruition very soon. We're excited about that.
Love it. Harry, what do you got wrapping it
Yeah, I
up?
mean that's all great stuff. We're all excited to see kind of what changes are ahead, and how the industry hopefully will improve from all standpoints. And obviously your job is never ending. There's always going to be major issues to deal with for many years to come. And we appreciate all that you guys do, and with all the challenges and that are in front of you. So we appreciate your time again. Thanks for dropping all this knowledge and insight to our audience, and I'm sure everyone will certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and many thanks to the CRA staff. They do a lot of hard work, and they really do care. We really do care about what we do. This is a very tough job. It's tough to regulate something that doesn't have federal support and is being built from the ground up. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about what's going on, from the regulator perspective. We look forward to getting more stakeholder feedback and look forward to being back on the show at another point. You got great
Anytime.
questions. Really appreciate it. Look forward to the next opportunity so that we can get together and have good conversations.
We always
Thank you
appreciate
again.
our conversations, Director Hanna. It's always a pleasure. And as a fellow veteran, I appreciate all the support that you've had for the veterans over the years. And we look forward to all the good things on the horizon. So, with that being said, episode 7 has come to an end. And what an episode it's been. Thank you, Director Hanna. Have a good one, everybody.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Thanks.
Take care.
Our next sponsor is from our friends over at Ganja Containers. Why is everyone switching to Ganja Containers? Simple. Child-resistant certified packaging at direct import prices. Plus, real customer service from people who understand your business. Your packaging costs shouldn't destroy your margins. Ganja Containers delivers certified quality, competitive pricing, and personalized service. That's the Ganja Containers difference. Get at Josh Roberts for all of your Ganja container needs. Josh, we appreciate you.